Well, hello, folks. Welcome to The Sacred Speaks. My name is John Price. I'm your host, and we are back for an episode investigating the sacred. And today I have a fella named Sean Manseau and a stack of books over here to introduce to you guys. One of course, being his. Sean Manseau has written a book called AP Psychedelics, and it's going beyond set and setting to achieve visionary virtuosity. Sean created the first church of David Bowie. It's a collision of pop culture and entheogens and ceremonial process that people go through who have a lot of experience in the world of psychedelics. So I guess what I'll begin with saying is this is a disclaimer. The following interview has nothing to do with psychological or medical advice. Anytime you're considering using these sacramental substances, do so with an awareness that there are doors you can open that are overwhelming. So be sure to consult the people that you need to consult who will guide you through a proper process. Of course, everything's changing nationally in the United States in the world of psychedelics, so it's an important time to be able to go proceed through those avenues where you have a real curated environment that people have cared for and your safety set and setting have been ensured. But Sean offers a lot of ideas for how to further expand this process. And I guess this picks up on a thread that Dr. Bill Barnard and I actually picked up with Dr. Bill Barnard a few episodes ago with the Santo Daime tradition, and that what Sean's proposing and talking about in the First Church of David Bowie is a new religious movement and a new sacramental process, a new ceremony. And it's compelling, interesting, and Sean's an incredibly likable person, so it's fun to talk to. It's fun to talk to him about this. So with the disclaimer said, I want to introduce Sean and his work, and then we'll move on to some other things and get started. So first of all, Sean, I'll read his bio. Sean Manseau was born in Boston, Massachusetts, the son of a married Roman Catholic priest and a former sister of St. Joseph. At various points, he has been a mall janitor, a lounge act guitarist, a failed paratrooper, a San Francisco bike messenger, a video game animator, a Muay Thai instructor, homeless, an East Village NYC bartender, a failed novelist, a gym owner, and a video game industry executive. In addition to AP Psychedelics, going beyond set and setting to achieve visionary virtuosity, he is the author of the spiritual autobiography Spotify the Gnostics. Here's the First Church of David Bowie. The coaching manual by the numbers, a practical guide for instructing multi-modal GPP training, and the novel Lapdance, and the short story collection You Are Not a Planet and Other Stories. He lives in Portland, Oregon with his dog Jones. And please see below to the link to purchase the book. It's a $10 book on Amazon, and it's a fun read for anybody who has been mining this territory. So thanks, Sean, for the interview. Thanks for connecting, and just thanks for the inspiration. So I want to jump ship real quick. You'll get to Sean in a moment. Quickly, a couple things coming up on The Sacred Speaks. In this order, I think. The first is a conversation I'm excited about, Hermetic Spirituality and the Historical Imagination, Altered States of Knowledge in Late Antiquity by Wouter Hanegraaff. And this was a cool conversation at the right time of my life, and I'll be releasing that episode in a few weeks. Then coming up, I have an interview with Edward Beaver on the realities of witchcraft and popular magic in early modern Europe, culture, cognition, and everyday life. We're going to jump into witchcraft. And then at some point, I've got an interview with Doug Lynham, From Monk to Money Manager, a former monk's financial guide to becoming a little bit wealthy and why that's okay. Doug's a really good guy and he's just a fascinating human, so I'm excited to have him on. Of course, I'm excited for all these things. A couple of notes. I want to point you to the Center for the Healing Arts and Sciences, a boutique integrative clinic that my wife and I created a while back. Certainly look us up at the Center for HAS, link below. Look at The Sacred Speaks, of course, lots coming on there. And eventually this whole thing will be buttoned up, but it's taken forever. So check it out when you can. And as always, check out the music from Modern Nations. At the end of the episode, you can hear the full selection from the theme music of this podcast called Clouds by Modern Nations. Check them out at modernnationsmusic.com. And I think that's it for now. I do. I have a couple of of, just so you know, people who, a couple of testimonials. So somebody who had attended the First Church of David Bowie says, "It's unlike anything I've ever experienced. The journey that Shaman Pa guided me on helped me to rediscover parts of my soul I'd forgotten. Through familiar story and song, I connected with the eternal truth that reside in all of us. I've never considered how powerful and safe a shaman-guided medicinal experience could be until the First Church of David Bowie showed me." So here's some a couple of folks who've been and returned to experience. My experience was transformative. I really wasn't sure what to expect, but I trusted Sean fully and was not disappointed. I worked through some tough points to emerge with a sense of strength and positivity that I could hold on to for many years. And Sean's practice could be called a ceremony, but it might as well be called a service. He leads people through what starts off seeming like a dazzling psychedelic disco dance, party, concert, performance, art piece, but draws on all those present in an immersive experience that goes far beyond that. And as he draws you in, he simultaneously pulls you down into the depths and through the rabbit hole. And when you've come out the other side, ascended, you feel energetically cleansed. So a lot of cool things Sean's doing, and check out his book. For now, that's it. Let's leave it there. Sean, as we were talking a second ago, I'm stoked for many reasons to chat, because we're going to speak a couple of different languages as we navigate this territory. One being an academic language, which you have and you reference through the book. Then also a lot of pop culture and ecstatic experience and alternate states of consciousness. You're up to some really cool things. I've been very eager to chat, and I have Tom Hatsis to thank for this, and check him out in an earlier interview. And here's your book. I will look below and be directed to Tom and his work. But for now, we're talking about your book, AP Psychedelics, Going Beyond Set and Setting to Achieve Visionary Virtuosity. And Sean Manseau, it's good to sit with you today, man. I'm really
It's
grateful.
great. It's great to be here. It's really nice to meet you.
Yeah, you too. So we're gonna dive in, and we'll see kind of how we navigate. But I would like to structure part of not only your personal history and of course what this is that you're writing about and how
Hmm.
you got to this, because you're a, I don't know, you're like a practitioner and a ceremonial curator. You know, I don't know what you call yourself, but that's what comes to mind. I mean, you're setting up these spaces for the listener or the viewer. We're going to make sense of this. There's a lot of academic and intellectual and ecstatic currents that are, as you said earlier, making their way through the collective unconscious into popular culture and the sciences, and we're in a radical period of time. So again, your personal history, what this thing is, and then what you're seeing as you're setting up these ceremonial spaces. Please just give us an introduction to you first, and then I'm going to ask questions as we go.
Okay. So I am the child of a married Roman Catholic priest and an ex-nun. In an early age, around the age of 12, I rejected Christianity and kind of went to war with my dad
Hmm.
about that for a few years. But the apple didn't fall very far from the tree. In college, I worked with, or I experimented, I should say, with psychedelics recreationally, like so many of us did.
Yeah.
And I inadvertently, I had one night that was supposed to be just a good time hanging out with my friends, turned into a full blast ontological revelation. And I had a spontaneous intuition of what turned out to be emanationism, in this sense that there is an ultimate ground of being that in contemplating itself divides, and then in further contemplation continues to divide and ends up creating a reality that's organized into levels, in each level sort of being fractally self-similar to the next. I'd never been
Mm-hmm.
exposed to any such ideas, but when they arrived, they hit me like a hammer. And I ended up writing my undergrad thesis about that. That was this period where a book called Chaos, I forget what the subtitle was. The author was James Glick. It was this popular science book about chaos theory and fractal mathematics, which at the time were just starting to become known.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw a similarity between the way certain systems that seem chaotic on the whole are actually turn out to be fractal when you graph out their behavior over time. I saw a similarity between that and the way consciousness is organized, according to the perennial philosophy and mysticism.
So can you talk about that for a second, just so people can kind of be oriented? Perennial philosophy, chaos theory.
So I wrote up a brief. Luckily, I had a friend who was a journalism major who sat with me. I just asked him, please just stay with me, because I was in really way over my head. And he took extensive notes about the experience, and I was able to reconstruct what happened later. And so based on that, I wrote a paper and I brought it to a professor at UMass where I was attending named Julius Lester, when I had heard him describe himself in a lecture as a mystic. And I just wanted to see what he would think of it. And he read it over. He had this ability to speed read. It was really amazing. And then he looked at me and he said, you need to read Aldous Huxley's The Perennial Philosophy and Evelyn Underhill's Mysticism, and then we'll talk. And so I went and I read them. And so Huxley is the author of 1984. No, excuse me, that's Orwell. Huxley was Brave New World.
Brave New World, yeah.
But he also wrote this book, in The Perennial Philosophy, in which he took all these quotes from different religious traditions around the world and kind of laid them out side by side, so you could see that they seem to be more or less talking about the same thing. And that is actually an old idea called the perennial philosophy. I've seen it credited to Leibniz, the German mathematician Leibniz, but it probably goes back further than that, you know. And there's certain there do seem to be certain base claims that are common to religions throughout the world, or at least especially their mystical traditions, you know, that there is an ultimate all, and that its essential, its essence is love, and that you can experience this directly, and in doing so you will change your life, right? So there's this idea that seems to be, it's represented in different ways in different traditions, that reality that man is truly created in God's image, or another way to put that is that human consciousness is organized in the same way as ultimate consciousness is, and they're sort of like fractally self-similar. That means that like a fractal is something that when you can look at any feature of it, and when you zoom in on it, you'll see the whole again. And if you zoom in on a tiny little part of that, you'll see the whole. And you zoom in at any level, that's just how it works. And it suggests this model of existence that's rather like matryoshka dolls, those Russian nesting dolls, where one is within the next, within the next, within the next, within the next, all the way down to our level. And that was so when I saw that in chaos theory and realized, oh, there might be some overlap here, that was what I wrote my thesis on. But that was the end of I'm not an academic. I should stress that, right? I have a lay interest in all this stuff, and have sort of kept up with it over the decades. And then I never expected to be in the place where I am now and doing the work that I am. I had sort of hit a professional and personal crossroads in 2016. And I found an ayahuasca group. I've been reading about ayahuasca. Ayahuasca was having a moment around that time. And I was thinking about going down to the jungle, but then I met a guy who was running he had apprenticed with a Shipibo Indian down in Peru, and apparently ran a pretty tight ship. And so I started sitting with him, and I ended up sitting with him about, I think, 34 times altogether. In the context of those ceremonies, you know, one of the bits of received wisdom in the ayahuasca space is that the spirit of the plant will talk to you. You know, Mother Aya, you'll hear people say things like, Mother Aya told me, or Aya told me this. And at one point, Aya told me that I was a priest from a long line of priests. And if there was a priest gene, that I had it, and I needed to find a way to put that into practice. And at first I thought that maybe that meant trying to become an ayahuasquero, but that was not so appealing to me for a number of reasons. I really liked, so for anybody who's not familiar with the way ayahuasca works, ayahuasca is primarily in South America, it's a medical practice. And people go to see their ayahuasqueros for treatment of various ailments, whether they're physical or mental or spiritual. And the way Matt, the ayahuasquero I worked with, put it, the ayahuasca turns on the lights in the operating room, but what really does the work are all the plants that the practitioner has done diets with. And so that's what That's what works. And the way it works, the way the plants help you is they teach the practitioner a song called an ikaro. And so the practitioner sings the song to you, and that's what somehow energetically heals you. So I found that appealing, the idea of singing, because I wasn't a singer, but I'd always wanted to be. But at the same time, to become an ayahuasquero, you have to do these long dietas, these diets, which involve celibacy and prolonged periods of isolation. And I was already feeling, celibate and isolated enough at the time. I didn't need any more of that stuff, But I was entertaining that notion. And then the other thing too is there's a fairly strong, and pache to anybody that I might possibly offend here, but I'm not much of a hippie, and I don't resonate with some of like that sort of like hippie-ish nature energy. It's wonderful. I think it's beautiful. It's just not me. And there was a strong sort of seeing these, people from North America dressing up as if they were Peruvian Indians and stuff was not really my bag. And I wasn't really sure how I would fit into that. But I sort of left it on the back burner. And at the time I had written this, so I had a background professionally. I've been a bike messenger, and I've been a bartender, and I've been a failed novelist. But I was also in the video game industry as an animator, and I also owned some gyms, and on the East Coast, and I developed a teaching method for instructing exercise based on my background as an animator, and wrote this great big book about it. So in 2016, I was traveling a lot. Every month I was going around the country doing seminars and stuff. It was kind of like, it was working. And this one, in May of, it wasn't 2016, it was 2017. In May of 2017, the weekend that I would have been sitting with the ayahuasca group, I had to travel. I had to go to Cleveland to teach a seminar. But I wanted to do something. I wanted to do some kind of ceremonial work because I wanted to move forward with this idea of trying to become a practitioner of some sort, I wanted to learn to navigate those spaces a little bit better. I had some mushrooms that had been sitting in the back of my freezer for 6 months. And I'm sorry, is this okay that I'm just sort of monologuing you?
Yeah. Well, actually, I've been thinking about this because the fact that you're not an academic is such a strength in this context. That is one of the I've been so excited to chat just because it's going to draw from me in different ways. It's going to monologue your ass off, man.
Okay. And so, and the thrust of my work is bringing this stuff into a pop cultural context and making it available to people in a way that academics and people who are too wrapped up in traditional ceremonial magic can't, because it's just too sort of like obscurist. Just
to relate to that for a second, my dissertation was on the psychology of fame, and so I wrote about Bowie and Iggy Pop and Bono and Joni Mitchell and all that. Like, awesome. I love this subject. So that's what I mean is we can speak a language in that territory. Yeah. I'm really stoked.
Yeah.
So yes, go. I love where you're going.
Okay. So I had these mushrooms, and I was like, well, I'm gonna make up my own little ceremony. And try to model it on sort of what Matt did. I had some, because I was assisting, which only basically meant like I took the money and I helped people to the bathroom, but I also blew tobacco smoke on them if they were having a hard time in ceremony.
Yeah.
So I knew how to use mapacho to sort of like to bless the space and stuff like that. And so I put on, and I was like, well, and for once I'll be able to use music that I want to listen to, because an ayahuasca ceremony is silent except for the times when the practitioner is singing the icaros. The rest of the time, it's just you're sitting in the dark and in the quiet. And so I had a bunch of stuff. I put on like Mystery of the Bulgarian Voices and Iron and Wine and just sort of stuff that seemed like mellow and like good to work with, and stuff that would have passed MAPS recommendations for how to use music in that space, right? But then I put on a record that is really important to me in my personal life. It's called In the Airplane Over the Sea by an indie rock band called Neutral Milk Hotel. And this record came out in 1998. And so just as a little historical context, the story behind it, which is somewhat apocryphal, is that Jeff Mangum, who is the singer-songwriter behind the band, had read Anne Frank's The Diary of a Young Girl as an adult and kind of had a collapse over it, just spent weeks just weeping and weeping and weeping and thinking about her. And as a way to process those feelings, he wrote a song cycle about inventing a time machine to try to go back and save her. And it became this record, In the Airplane Over the Sea, which is really precious to a lot of people. Even though it's relatively unknown among a certain set of like indie rock fans, it's a really important record. So I put that record on, and I'm listening to it and I'm grooving to it and everything. And then I did a little, another thing that I learned about from the ayahuasca space is using hape, which is a tobacco snuff that has often has extra psychoactive ingredients. So I had some called Mozzie's Extra, which has a little bit of Toei in it. And so this stuff is not psychoactive by itself, but when you use it in combination with another psychedelic medicine, it changes your visionary experience. So I did a little hape, and I saw this beautiful, like it was this sort of idyllic backyard American nighttime summertime scene, like a backyard patio with Japanese lanterns and lights and stuff like that, and little kids playing, and it was wonderful. And then the song started playing called "O Comely" and "O Comely" it's just Mangum and his guitar, and it's this dirge. It's this really like funereal dirge, and it's effectively, as I say in AP Psychedelics, I describe it as in a Michel Gondry Science of Sleep kind of magical realist way. It's about Anne and about her terrible fate. And as I'm listening to this track, I'm starting just doing like a gentle sort of rocking. And then I started to feel like the sadness of of the song started to overtake me. And then spontaneously, I started getting images of the camps. I saw like these windowless brick buildings and barbed wire fences and churned frozen mud. And as the more I saw that stuff, you're seeing it basically, it's like there's a strong parallel between the psilocybin experience and dream states. In a lot of ways, like the psilocybin, once you get past the the walls are rippling or whatever, like especially when you're working just with your eyes closed, what you start to see in your what I call your visionary space, which is just your mind's eye, is a lot like dreaming, or at least like hypnagogic sorts of images. So I'm seeing these images and I'm getting these stronger and stronger emotions in them. With that, those emotions start to become so strong that it starts to feel like there's an electric current flowing through my body, like starting from my feet and coming up through my body, which I'd never experienced before on psychedelics. And I had good 50 trips under my belt at that point between ayahuasca and LSD and mushrooms and stuff. This was a new thing for me. And as the emotion got stronger and stronger, my sort of davening in my seat got stronger and stronger. And I found myself clenching my fist because something was telling me to sort of like hold on to the energy, which I did. And then when the song reached its climax, I spontaneously took in a big breath and opened my hand and blew the energy that I felt like I'd been containing in my fist out into the room, and then did it to the other side, and then just sort of fell back and was like, what the hell was that? And had a distinct impression that the mushrooms themselves were sort of like, what was that? Do that again. And so I started experimenting and found, just for the rest of the evening, because at that point, that was probably like, I was probably peaking at that point. I was a couple hours in. And I found that I was able to get different aesthetic effects from working with different songs. And that was fascinating to me. Like what I was seeing in my head would sort of change in character and content and intensity based on the song that I was working with. And I wasn't at all sure what that possibly meant. But there was only one way to find out, and that was to go do it again. And so the next weekend, I was back at it again, and I know this time I was working, I think, with a particularly strong strain of cubensis called Penis Envy. They're very visual. But this night, so I made another playlist and I was listening to it. But about 2 hours in, it seemed like it was crapping out, and I was like, oh damn, maybe I just did this too soon. Like maybe I built up tolerance and it's not working. But I was like, but I only had a very limited supply. And I was like, well, I wasted this. I should have waited. But I remembered somebody tell me that if you smoke some weed, you could sort of like reawaken the mushrooms. And I had a pre-rolled joint. I wasn't not much of a pot smoker, but I had some around. And I was living in a tiny little studio apartment in Seattle. And I went outside, and I don't know what possessed me, but I took 3 hard hits of pot in about 2 minutes. It was literally like, and then again, and then again. And then when I went back inside, my hands, I was shaking because I could feel like something was coming on like a freight train. And I put on this song by the Smashing Pumpkins called Cherub Rock. It was from a record called The Siamese Dream. And this song was important to me in my youth. And this is one of the things that ends up being important for this work is some songs are better for this stuff than others. And songs that the first time you heard it, you're like, I need to hear that again. I need to hear that again. I got to listen to that again. Those are very efficacious. And listening to that song on that level of psychedelic load just blasted me out into like way into like, the quote unquote ego death territory. But what I always, of course, the ego death is not the end goal. For me, the ego death is like, have you ever seen Watchmen?
Yeah.
The movie and the comic Watchmen, right? When the physicist, I forget his real name, who ends up being Dr. Manhattan, ends up in that, he has his like lab accident that tears him apart at a molecular level. That's the ego death, right? But the important thing is that he reassembled himself under his own will, and then he can work with that energy in a completely sort of coherent and lucid state. And over the course of the last 5 years, that is what I've learned to do. And I'm going to try to, so I told a friend about it, and he told me about a comic book called Phonogram. And in Phonogram, there are these young hip Brits in the 90s who do magic, like Harry Potter style magic. But the way they do it is they listen to pop music, and that gives them the fuel that they need in order to cast these spells. And I was like, oh, I just felt this moment of recognition. And I decided to call what I was doing phonomancy, which is what they called it, which made me a phonomancer, somebody who could do basically magic in the sense of transforming my consciousness by using music in this very intentional way in this context. So for the rest of the summer, I experimented, and then two really significant things happened. One was I decided to combine this practice with sigil magic. And so for anybody who doesn't know, a sigil is a symbol. It's a kind of witchy looking glyph that encodes an intention. It comes out of the practice of chaos magic, which is basically like the 70s punk rock version of ceremonial magic. And so, and I don't know what possessed me to do this, but I wrote out an intention. I wrote, teach me to do magic, David Bowie. And then what you do is you cross out the vowels and any repeating consonants, and then you combine them to get a certain shape. And what you do then is you charge it. And there's a variety of ways to do that. Grant Morrison, the comic book writer, did it by bungee jumping, by holding the sigil in his hand. And the most popular technique is you masturbate, and at the moment of orgasm, you look at the sigil. And the idea is that somehow that imprints it upon your personal unconscious. From there, it makes its way out into the collective unconscious and acts as a seed for a new reality, the results. And I don't know about all that, but what I do know is that I took that, and I had this playlist, and there were some Bowie tracks on there. And so I had, I want to say there was like, I know there was Queen Bitch was on there and Rebel Rebel, but the song where it ended up working, it started with White Light, White Heat, the cover from the D.A. Pennebaker concert album, right? And so I was looking at it, and I concentrated on it when they go at the end. I'm like concentrating on it, and nothing happened. And then Moon Age Daydream started, and then I was having a full blast 3D lucid dream vision, like nothing I'd ever seen before. And what I saw was myself, and I was like, it's middle of summer. I'm in this tiny little apartment. I'm shirtless. I'm in just a pair of black shorts, and dancing. That's how I realized I could, because this stuff made me anxious, especially at the doses I was working with. I needed to do something with the physical sensations of being on that many drugs. And the way that I worked with it to prevent it from becoming agita was to dance. And so I was dancing with these songs, and I saw myself on stage shirtless and dancing, and there was a crowd in front of me, maybe 100 or 150 people. And I knew that in this space, I was on mushrooms, but so were they. And they were looking up, but they weren't looking at me. They were looking at this sigil projected on the screen behind me, the sigil that I had made that stood for Teach Me to Do Magic, David Bowie. And they were also what they were trying to do was what I had done, which was make an energetic connection with the archetype that Bowie represented, not Bowie himself, but what he represented in popular consciousness, which is the magician, in terms of like the second card in the tarot deck. And I further understood that it was a party. We were having a dance party, but it was also a kind of class, and I was leading it. I was the instructor. I was on stage, not to be watched for my performance, but to model for them how to perform this sort of like whatever it was that we were we were doing. And then I came out of it almost 5 minutes, like this whole thing, just this sense of, and so this is where it starts to get weird. Here's where it starts to get
Yeah,
weird.
not anything else.
No. So mushrooms are notorious for giving people messianic ideas, right? You go in and you come back and you're like, I'm John the Baptist, I'm Jesus Christ, right? And I had that happen to me. I wasn't told I was John the Baptist or Jesus Christ, but I was sort of shown this sort of, the only way I can sort of describe it is it looked like a you know, the map of the Sephiroth from Kabbalah, the spheres,
Yes.
the multiple spheres, right? Now imagine that as sort of being drawn with baseball bases, like as a sort of schematic, and then seeing that superimposed over a map of the Middle East. And I was, can you visualize that?
Yes.
Okay. And it was sort of explained to me that what was happening was an archetypal situation. I'm sorry that I have to say this out loud. It's humiliating and ridiculous, but this is what happened to me, right? It was like, this is a world teacher arriving situation. And this is like, there are various like archetypal elements that are all in this certain relation. There's this energetic relationship between them that marks this sort of event, and it's happening to you. And how do you like that? Does that make everything worthwhile? Like this whole sort of like, because I'd ended up in a place in life where my life made no sense to me whatsoever, in terms of all my experiences and all the things that I had done and everything, but all of a sudden it was coming together in this. And it, you know, when you have an experience like that, as you know, like the stuff hits with the weight of divine revelation. It's convincing, right? And the way I would describe it to you, I was excited to find out that you are you still working through your Jungian analyst training?
No, I've got a doctorate in Jungian psychology.
Okay,
yeah.
so you need to update your bio then.
Yeah.
Because right?
That's old then, man. That happened a long time. That's good.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the note.
So okay, so what I would regard this then, Dr. Price, is I experienced an archetypal activation. And the archetype that got activated was the prophet archetype, right? Where you come back from this experience and you have an absolutely irresistible urge to tell everybody what just happened, you know? And you just have to, you know. So now at that point you've got two choices. You can believe it 100% and give in to what's effectively archetypal inflation, right? And go around strutting and telling everybody like, I've got a message from God and you need to listen to me. Or you can do what Jung said and maintain a sort of critical distance from the experience and be like, okay, that happened. I know it happened. I'm not going to try to tell myself it didn't happen, but what does that mean? You know, like what is this? What could this possibly mean? And that is, to my mind, for all these people who come back with these messianic ideations, they never have a plan and they never really have anything to say, to my mind, except like, I am God, I'm God on earth now, you should, you know, listen to my wisdom. But they don't really have anything new or interesting to say. It's just regurgitating old stuff, right? And so the second part of this is, so that happened. And then I kept going with this, but now I was afraid because I was like, oh my God, I don't want to be a mental case. You know what I mean? Like, I didn't want to tell anybody what had happened, but I kept experimenting. And then one day I had this amazing realization. I was looking at my playlist because I kept experimenting and I would delete a track and add a track. But over time I had found this list of tracks. It was about 3.5 hours long. It was the length of time of a mushroom trip that were the most sort of efficacious for, like, seemed to get the best visionary results. Because that's all that mattered to me. It was like, what seems to stimulate the greatest response from the mushrooms. And there was like a what I was calling the Invocation of the Divine Mother, which is this sort of this gentle sort of chamber pop to sort of soothe me as I was, you know, coming on. And then I always had problems with anxiety, so I had programmed a block of like heavy and aggressive rock music that was like, it just pumped me up and got me through it. And with stuff like Jane's Addiction and Mastodon and stuff like that, you know. Being a Gen Xer, of course, that was the music that I went to, right?
I related so much with your music.
But we'll get back to this in a second. But then after that, then I would relax, and there was a bunch of like new wave and soul and funk, and that was all. So all the aggressive rock stuff had masculine vocalists, and then all the pop stuff had feminine vocalists. And then at the end, I still had those 4 songs from the end of in the airplane over the sea. It had occurred to me that I wanted to try to do something for the murdered children of the world, right? And I had constructed this little sort of ceremony at the end where I was listening to these songs. But what I realized was I was looking at the tracks is, so the hero's journey, of course, is this template for stories that seems to be common to myths and stuff around the world. It was popularized by Joseph Campbell. And I know I know you know this, but I'm saying this for anybody who might be listening, right? And it goes in stages. And there's, depending on who you talk to, there's as few as 3 or as many as 22 stages. But associated with every stage is kind of an emotion, you know, like all these stories, any story that's constructed along the lines of the hero's journey or can be interpreted that way starts with the hero in the everyday world. And that, to cite a familiar example, like Luke Skywalker on Tatooine wanting to get off the moisture farm and go off to the space academy or wherever he's going to go. That's the hero in the everyday world. It's mundane. He's bored. But there's a problem. There's something lurking in the background, even though that's going to undermine all this stuff, right? And so that would be an emotion that would go along with that sort of like youthfulness or naivete or whatever. And then there's another one would be, the call to adventure, right? And that's this sort of stirring or like sense of possibility. But then often there's the refusal of the call, which is this like reluctance, right? So there's these different emotions. And so what I realized looking at my playlist was that if I took each of the songs that I was working with as sort of having a target emotion, that was something that I had been thinking about, this idea that popular recorded music, every song that I was working with had been carefully engineered to create a really specific emotional response in the listener, right? And I cite the familiar examples I use are like, it could be a state of psyched up aggression, like Fight Fire with Fire by Metallica, or Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, right? Or it could be a sense of like melancholy, like Autumn Leaves by Frank Sinatra, right? There's every song that you listen to has been designed for that. And to the extent that you enjoy it, it's because you resonate with that emotion somehow. You felt that and you enjoy feeling that again, feeling like that again. And that to a large extent is how we use music. We either are feeling a certain way and want to reinforce it, so we put on a song that makes us feel that way, or we're feeling a certain way and we want to break ourselves out of that, so we put on something to cheer us up, right? So when I was looking at the tracks in my playlist, both for the rock part, the dance part, and the Anne Frank part, if I regarded each of them as representing an emotion, the emotions dovetailed almost exactly to the contours of the stages of the hero's journey. I hadn't meant to organize it like that at all. It happened. It was spontaneous. And that hit me again, like a ton of bricks. I'm actually getting goosebumps just now, just like remembering it. It was this, it felt like synchronicity, right? Which is a meaningful coincidence. And, you know, for somebody standing outside it, well, it's just a coincidence. But the point of synchronicity is it means something to you. It hits you like, whoa, something happened here. Something came through me here. And then once I realized that came together with that vision I had of being on stage and performing. And I realized that what I wanted to do was present this phonomantic rite, as I was calling it at the time, as a theatrical experience.
When was this?
This was the summer of 2017.
Okay.
Yep. So almost exactly 5 years ago. And that I was going to have these dance parties that were going to also somehow be theater and involve like costumes and lights and everything, in which I would do this work with other people. We would do it together. We would go through these things and have these, because what I had come to realize, there's a lot more to all this stuff than just the practice itself. There is actually what I'm working on now is basically a new conceptual approach to religion. But this was the nascent beginning of what I consider my phonomantic method. So there's phonomancy, which is the practice of inducing visionary trance by listening to popular music while under the dose of a high dose of psychedelic, right? That's the actual practice, phonomancy. But then there's the phonomantic method. And what the phonomantic method is that practice, but also a series of conceptual innovations. And everybody's familiar with the idea of set and setting, right? That's this common idea that, for an optimal psychedelic experience, you want to go into it with the right mindset, and you want to have an optimal setting, which is, generally speaking, from a therapeutic point of view, quiet, and safe and as soothing as possible. In fact, that's the whole point of considerations of set and setting, is to reduce the amount of stress that people are under,
Mm-hmm.
right? What I've done is introduce three more S's: structure, stress, and skill. And it totally changes the way that you can use this stuff. Rather than being a passive recipient of the effects of the medicine, now you can have active agency. And you can actually use it both to control the psychedelic experience and use it as part of a practical program of self-actualization. And so this stuff was basically I was thinking about this idea of structure, like structure in terms of what that means. In terms of this ceremony that I was putting together, meant like putting it on a schedule. Like you were going to have something to do every minute of those 4 hours, right? Having a ceremonial structure to it, a beginning and a middle and an end, like. But for me, that's like an invocation and a processional, and then the main magical workings and then a recessional. It was going to have narratives, and that there were going to be stories that would be told that would indicate the emotional target of each song to follow, to help the audience follow through it. And then there was also activities. There were specific things that you were supposed to be doing, and they were on a gradation of difficulty. I mean, the first level is just being able to stand up and dance. Even though you might want to sit down, the mushroom might make you want to sit down. You actually have to be able to train yourself to have this, overcome that tendency and get up and dance, because dancing embodies the emotion of the song. And then from there, the next step is singing along with it, because singing is effectively a control system for the psilocybin fueled control psychedelic experience. It affects you in terms of cymatically, in terms of how the vibrations you're feeling in your body, but more importantly, it brings you into the narrative space of the song and helps you feel that emotion. And that's something we all spontaneously do when we're alone in our cars and listening to our favorite song. We start singing along and really like getting into it. And getting into it is the key, because when you amplify the emotion and you keep amplifying on it, and if you're on a sufficient dose, eventually the emotion grows so strong that you are no longer feeling your personal emotion, but starting to feel the collective human experience of that emotion. It's archetype. And so I am conjecturing, and this is based on my n=1 sample, that archetypes are not just these static images that you can encounter, and they're not just influences in your behavior, but they're sort of like these energetic currents in the divine mind, like the Gulf Stream. You know what I mean? Like through, and you can actually, and another way to think about it is they're frequencies of the Godhead. If I like to draw the analogy between, mystics talk about the Godhead as being this white light that is love, like this, eternal white light. But, the sun sends white light too. But if you hold up a prism to it, you can see all the different spectrums of light within that white light. And to me, all the emotions that we experience are actually the emotions that the God experiences, or the goddess experiences, or however you want to put it. And it's what we feel is just the palest reflection of that. And so what this whole theatrical thing that I put together is an opportunity to train that with other people. And now I'm landing it, I'm bringing it home. So I fully believe that anything you can do by yourself can be amplified and intensified by doing it alongside other people. Mm-hmm. Whether that's going to watching comedy or going to see live music or whatever, and that is certainly going to be, that's could possibly be true of the mystical experiences that psychedelics can create. But in order for people to gather in groups, you're going to and do more than just lay there on their mats and have technically speaking, an ayahuasca experience is a group thing. You're in a group with people in the Maloka, right? But everybody's on their mat and everybody's isolated. Everybody's just in their own thing. What I'm proposing is something where you're all coming together to have to share moments together. In order for that to happen, you have to have readily understandable activities. And you also have to have a modicum of self-control, so that if you start to have difficulty, you don't spoil the experience for everybody else. The stuff can be extremely stressful, and you have to learn to be able to control yourself and deal with those internal stressors. And there's a model for this right now, which is Santo Daime. And
so I've been wanting to go there. The last guy I interviewed was Bill Bernard, who just wrote a book called Liquid Light on the Santo Daime, and a lot of correlations here.
Yep. So much so, but the joke that I make in AP Psychedelics in my book is that if the cliched thing would be to say that the phonemantic right and it's entheotainments, which is my
Yeah.
trademark for this ceremonial thing, right? Entheotainments is if the cliche thing would be to say it's Santo Daime on steroids, but it's not really. It's Santo Daime on the gamma bomb explosion that created the Incredible Hulk for a variety of reasons. Part of it has to do with the use of technology, just the sheer like electronic amplification, and then using music videos and lights and costumes and everything to create really, really, really intense environments. Yeah, exactly. It's fucking fantastic. Um, and of course, then just the pure raw emotion of the songs themselves. Because the fact of the matter is, most of them, like, and pache to everybody who writes, like, has been writing like their own ikaros and stuff like that. But I find, I just attended a magic ceremony the other day, and this woman had come up with this thing, and she had this very sort of like sing-songy refrain that she would do. And I don't want to do it because I don't want to, make it back to her. I don't want to insult her. But it just wasn't, it was fine for what it was, right? But you can, what you can do is you can take these all-time classic pop songs that millions of people have loved, like Atomic by Blondie, and repurpose that as a hymn to the goddess. And then you can sing at the end, when everybody's singing Atomic at the end, they are invoking her presence. And when you do it together, like, what you're doing is you're singing along with the recording, and among other things, what that does at a very high level is it enables a kind of do you know the term ekagata from Buddhism? It refers to one-pointed concentration or meditative absorption. And there's this trick that you can do when you're on a very big dose, but you're also able to concentrate really, really super strongly, and the music's loud enough, is that you sing along with the track, but the music is actually louder than what you can hear coming out of your mouth. But you neurally remap your oral experience of the song onto your own vocal apparatus. In other words, you are singing, but you're hearing the voice on the track as your voice, and it overcomes this subject-object duality. And when you do that, it drops you multiple levels deeper into the collective unconscious.
This reminds me of what Dennis McKenna and I spoke a while back, and he was talking about Terrence and he in the jungle messing with vocalization and kind of syncing the vocals with the mushroom's voice, which is radical.
Yeah. So what you're really doing is bending the power of the mushrooms to your will. You're taking that magic. I'm not fucking kidding. Yeah. It's not easy. It's hard, but the results are spectacular, or they can be, and you're supported by the song itself. You don't even have to be that good a singer, as long as and the song is constantly calling you forward to become a better singer. And that's I mean, there's so many stumbling blocks to me being able to bring this to the world. But one of them is the fact that Americans are not singers, and our culture sort of in a lot of ways discourages people from learning to sing. They just are afraid of it. But I've taught myself how to sing over the last 5 years. And if I can do it, like, anybody can do it. It's not to the level that anybody would want to pay to hear me, but I can actually do it. And that makes, like I said, it becomes this control system. And there, I did it.
You did. Thank you
for being patient.
You're kidding. I'm fully attentive. But I have questions, and this is kind of where thank you for all that. That was informative and inspirational. As a clinician, of course, when I was reading your book, I was thinking, I have that healing kind of container, setting the container.
Yeah.
But there's something else in this, which you're not infantilizing people. I mean, you're noting, by the way, here's the disclaimer. This is not for anybody to jump into. You talk in the book about being able to build your skill level, as you say in the 5 S's. Build your skill level, be able to gradually increase your capacity to be in these visionary experiences and to learn the territory. And I immediately think of Stan Groff in Psychonaut, like this, to be learning the nature and dimensions of this interior space, and then how to come back, right? Because that's actually one of the parts of the hero's journey, is to reemerge into the world of the familiar, to bring back something that is some token or skill.
there's no point to it unless you bring back something for everybody else.
Right. So that's the disclaimer part. And I think that's important because people are, you said early on when you, in magic, ceremonial magic, you kind of design your container around you because these energies, for lack of a better term, can take life of their own and can influence other people, can affect other people. So really being sure that you're creating the container. This
Hmm.
reminds me of what people in the kink community do. Create the container, have the agreement, talk about what you
Yeah,
want, what you don't
yeah,
want, like draw your lines and I think so that's very important. And I want to say that as we are going to dive into
good.
some applications here.
May I just interject quickly with a
Totally.
I can clarify. I have I've got a good metaphor to address what you're talking about,
Cool.
which is I draw in the book. I draw an analogy between you know the clinical use of psychedelics in a therapeutic session is a lot like what a physical therapist does, where they're taking a person who is ill or injured and bringing them back to a state of normal functioning.
Hmm.
And that is it's a really careful process. You know what I mean? You've got somebody who's got a hurt knee or a hurt back or whatever, and they do these restorative exercises and they get back to the point where they can walk without pain.
Hmm.
What I am doing is akin to what a strength and conditioning coach does, which probably
Hmm.
isn't surprising given my background, where I'm taking people who have normal healthy capacity, and by subjecting them to carefully titrated doses of stress while they're in an altered state of consciousness and consenting and fully aware of what they're letting themselves in for,
Totally.
I can help them develop super normal psychological capacities. And
That's
in
great.
this,
Yeah, and I really like so. Okay, I'm going to take that because I got a lot of threads I want to get into. Your use of the term anti-fragile is I really appreciate it. So I want to talk about cancel culture and trigger warnings and all that, and how you're taking it on in a different fashion. You know, because the image is a very safe, contemplative, low lit, calming space where you have two people that are there with you, that are highly trained, that are taking you through a process. This is the total opposite of that.
yeah,
This is fucking organized chaos, and it's every sensory mode, including
yes.
taking. And we're talking about, if anybody knows that's listening and watching, if anybody knows dosage, you're talking about 5 to 10 grams of,
Well,
of
so that's me as a practitioner,
yeah.
right? Like I do so I my generally speaking, especially in my, well, I'll describe what I do in private practice and then what I have done on stage, right? But in private practice, I'm generally working on between 7 and 10 grams of cubensis, but that is turbo boosted off the bat with a 4 gram, a water extract of 4 gram of Syrian rue. So I'm working with Silawaska, and then generally speaking, I do 3 hits of pot and sometimes vape DMT on that too, right? And so, but what I'm able to do that and maintain nearly perfect lucidity. Like I could sit here and talk to you just like this, and I have it on video like multiple times. I do these on video because in between songs, I come back when I'm working alone and I'll talk to my camera and narrate it, because especially when you do high doses, it's like having a night of like continuous REM sleep. There's no way you can remember all that stuff at the end of it. But what you can do is then go back and reconstruct that stuff. Now, when I perform this on stage, I usually do 5 grams plus the Syrian rue plus the hits of pot. But what I'm doing though is I am performing live and on stage in front of a crowd and like running lights by like on cue by like hitting foot switches on the floor, and then in between songs getting off stage and like changing costumes in the dark, and then actually doing the visionary. So there are psycho-spiritual exercises that you can do with many of these songs, like specific, I in the what I call the stereo myth, that's the rock part.
Mm.
So I told you it goes through the stages of the hero's journey, right? Well, when it gets to the stage of the descent into the cave, that's associated a lot of times with the encounter with the shadow, and so that's the song that I use for that part. So there's a story that goes with that thing, right? And in the story, you are supposed to imagine yourself as a young man named Ged, who's kind of going nowhere in life until he gets kidnapped by this cosmic figure who he I used to call him Ziggy Christ, but I realized how better name for him is Syzygy Stardust, like Syzygy, but Syzygy Stardust, right? And he takes you aboard his flying saucer, and he tells you that the Earth is in mortal danger, and you have to save it. And he transports you to this distant planet and drops you off. He's like, here, this is where you're gonna find what you need to save the world, but doesn't tell you what it is, and like basically abandons you there. And eventually you find yourself in you find a cave, which turns out to be an access tunnel into an underground alien civilization. And at a certain point, you find your way blocked by, and as you're wandering through the dark, you start thinking about things from your past. You start thinking about your alcoholic mom and like this racist joke you told and things like that, until you find your way blocked by a hole in the world in the shape of a man. And if you move this way, he moves this way. If you move this way, he moves this way. He's blocking you, right? And that's your shadow. And then you realize the only way to save the world is to go straight into the shadow. And at that point, Tool's 46 and 2 starts to play. God. And that song is like it's almost like it's purpose written for what is about to come, which is, that song is this heavy, really like disturbing song. And if you marry it with images taken from movies like The Ring and stuff like that, and the Amityville Horror, it becomes real disturbing. But that stuff is there, but you're really there. What you're really supposed to be doing, though, and the point of what I'm trying to make is you keep your eyes closed, because what you do is you do an active psychological self-inquiry while you're singing along the song. You say, show me what I don't want to know about myself. And it's just like doing active imagination, except that it's fueled by psilocybin. And you're doing it while you're singing and dancing along to this song, while you're on stage, while you're on a super heroic dose of substantia. And that is what I mean by visionary virtuosity. That is a proof of concept of the level of control that you can develop doing this stuff. And that's kind of why I go on stage like that, to show like, you can do this. This is possible. Like, nobody's done this yet. Even the ayahuasqueros are just sitting there on their, I mean, I'm not criticizing them. They do tremendous work, but they're not subjecting themselves to the emotional stress of performing on stage in front of people. And to this point, I've been doing the 2 times that I did it a couple dozen times in a little studio in Seattle. And in Portland, I did it twice just to an open audience, because I was getting desperate for some way to like try to get these ideas across to people.
And what happened?
Well, so you got to understand that this stuff is been in development. Like, I don't have any background in theater, right? And the first time I did it in Portland, I was still running it I had recorded the narrative chapters as audio files and had salted them throughout a Spotify playlist along with the songs, right? But I also had video screens on which I showed sigils that I had made for each song. So I was literally like, I would hit play on the Spotify playlist, and then in between songs and in between like changing costumes, I'd have to try to remember to like hit forward on the PowerPoint presentation to advance this thing, right? And so I had done that. And then my friend was like, you know what? It would be a lot easier if you just made that into an MP4 movie. And then you could have the tracks playing as the soundtrack and just have everything lead into one thing to the next, like seamlessly. I was like, oh, that's such a good idea. But what I did was I started by laying all the tracks out end to end. And then I put in the sigils, and I was like, well, why stop here? Right? There was this, I had this vision from early on. One of the songs that I work with in the Stereo Myth is this song by a thrash metal band called Astronoid. It's actually called, they're called Dream Thrash because they've got these really heavy, fast guitars, but these soaring like Cocteau Twins style vocals over the top of it, right? And there's this, during the guitar solo, when I was doing this stuff in the summer of 2017, I would always see images from the trench dogfight at the climax of Star Wars. I'd be hearing like this really fast ripping music go by, but I would be seeing the X-Wings and the TIE fighters and stuff like that. And just as an experiment, I found that film clip on YouTube and I put it in, and I was like, holy fuck, that's so cool. And then I ended up making music videos for every single song, right? And what I quickly realized was that you can excite these emotions in people, and then you can shape that excitement by using images to shape the aesthetic of moment. And
this is very therapeutic, by the way. There's a concept called reverie from Ogden. This is very much the bringing in the imagination of the analyst and having that be a part of not necessarily overtly. You don't need to be saying like, oh, I'm thinking about, but how do you use where you're going? Like if all of a
Yeah.
sudden as the analyst or the therapist, I'm thinking about quicksand and dying and like what's happening that this person's not conscious of or not bringing into the space, and how can you bring them out a bit further?
And so it's so just to give you another concrete example. So Jane's Addiction.
Of course.
We seem about the same age. So the
Yes,
song, you know the song 3 Days,
I do.
right? Which is this wonderful sort of tribal, like epic 10-minute thing, right? Which fits perfectly for the return, because that's at that point in the story, you've won the day, you've come through the ordeal, but you need to return back to the original point where you got dropped off. And the song of you that's supposed to accompany your imaginary trip back through that alien jungle is this song 3 Days. So the song builds up to a tremendous climax, and then all of a sudden everything drops out, and there's this really gentle and ethereal strummed bass part, just like bass chords, and like Perry sort of chanting in the background, and it's gorgeous. But what I want to do at that point is give people an opportunity to connect to the archetype of the mother of sorrows. And so what I do is at that point in the video, all of a sudden it cuts to a full screen image of William Adolphe Bouguereau's La Pieta, which is Mary holding the corpse of Christ. But the thing about this painting is it's zoomed way in, so it's just her face. You can see a little bit of his body here, but what you see are her eyes, these haunted eyes. And then over that, so you got the gentle strummed bass chords like from the track, and then you've got this image, and then over that I dubbed in the sound of a woman wailing in grief. And those things all come together in that moment, and you're just like, oh my God, like you cannot help it. And the idea is in that you're framing it and you're thinking as you are contacting the archetype of the sorrowful mother. And if you're in the right place, it's fucking overwhelming because the energy just surges through you, but it's deeply cathartic. And then you show the emotional flexibility I talk about as being one of the along with anti-fragility and one of the sort of visionary sub-skills. And then you get back into the fucking rocking out afterwards, you know what I mean? And so you go through that. So you go through that whole thing. And I forget exactly what got me started on telling you about all this.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
But that's the thing. So it is this environment, and it's not entirely alien because people used to take. In the 90s, I used to take mushrooms and go to fish shows. You know what I mean? Or people take acid and go to Grateful Dead. It's all, and people of course take psychedelics and they go to raves and stuff like that. And the difference between what I'm doing and that is I'm just taking all that ecstatic joy and I'm yoking it to hard work via structure, stress, and skill. And I'm doing it so that people they don't just stay up here the whole way. They go through a full kind of like ascent and descent through the shadow and the ordeal and come out the other side. And in doing so, they are effectively, in my model, along with all those emotions, you can also associate an archetype or an archetypal figure or an archetypal situation, in which case you can basically train archetypes and complexify your character and work on your individuation in real time. It's basically, like I said, psilocybin fueled active imagination.
Yeah, see, that's the thing right there. Like yes, that got it. So go back for a second. You said bending the mushroom to your will or something like that. Say more about that?
Well, especially when you add in something like Syrian root really makes you want to like lie down and just dream, but I have an intention. I want to be on my feet experiencing powerful emotions. And so I don't give into that. And in fact, in the early days when I was first learning how to do this, I'd be dancing and feeling like I was wearing a 50-pound weight vest because I was actively working against the physiological effects of the mushrooms and having to effectively strengthen my will to the point where I could stand up against it and say, like, we're doing this, not what you say, and not in a disrespectful way, but I'm the human being here, and I'm worshiping the goddess with this, or I'm doing, so the first Church of David Bowie Shamanic Cabaret is a working prototype of this.
It's so good, man.
I know.
It's so
it's fucking ridiculous, but it's awesome. People always ask, like, why do you worship David Bowie? And I'm like, I don't. You don't. Except you don't worship Bowie, but what you do actually at one point is you use the image of Ziggy Stardust as a way to access the energies of the self. the child part of the tripart deity, the self with a capital S,
Well, this is
right?
the symbol and the sign. You know, it points
This,
to something. Don't
yeah,
don't let it
so the
be
way I think
closed.
about it is so you have these intense rushes of, you connect with the divine, you connect with the sacred, and you could just leave it as this abstract experience of energy. But you don't take this stuff literally. What you do, and what religions do, what theistic religions do, is they create an image of a human being for this energy to inhabit, and so you can relate to it as one person to another. And the way I always describe it to people, it's like holding up a stained glass window to the light of the rising sun, and his spirit passes through that window. It comes alive for you. And so Bowie, specifically as Ziggy Stardust, is a way to bring in the energies of the cosmic Christ. That's what Bowie made him to be, even though he didn't understand, like, he wasn't thinking about it that way. But you can use that, in that sort of like space age sort of like thing. You can experience that.
And it's also, Bono did this too. It's a way of consciously dealing with the projections, because you're getting a lot of Messiah projections
Yeah.
so when you are playful with these energies, you move through them, as opposed to letting the ego grab a hold and
Yes.
become the Christ.
You can never lose sight of the fact that religion is a game of make-believe that yields real-world results.
Yeah.
People get in trouble with religion. Traditional religions get in trouble when they take themselves in their stories literally.
The
But it's
concrete
all
fallacy. Yes.
it's what I call quasi-fictional or imaginally true. Doesn't matter whether those things actually happen. What matters is that you can use those stories to interpret events and use them as a sort of like instruction manual to achieve a certain kind of supernatural elevation. But once you realize that, then you realize, oh my God, we're free to come up with new stories. We're free to come up with new games. And that's what this is an attempt to do.
Yeah.
And every one of these things is a portrait of the divine, the way the artist, the creating artist, understands it. None of these, like the first church of David Bowie's Shamanic Cabaret, is the divine the way I experience it. And then when you go through it, you get to see God through my eyes. But if you were to get inspired and go make one of these, then I would get to see God through your eyes and learn that much more about it. And and one of these things can be made to help people experience the divine as void, the way the Buddhists do, or God as planetary matrix, the way the Gaian worshippers do. And I'd be delighted to go through a narrative theatrical experience that gave me something to do alongside other people. I mean, you got to understand, my background is, my gyms were CrossFit gyms, and CrossFit deservedly gets a bad rap, but it used to be it was brilliant. And what was brilliant about it was that it taught everyday people how to use like legitimate athletic training methods, and then put them in groups to do it together. And they would adjust the difficulty level of the movements or the weights or whatever to everybody's individual thing, but they would all go through it together. And in doing so, they would experience communitas. They would have an ordeal together and then come out feeling bonded. And that's why CrossFit became so incredibly popular, because it provided that in a way that nothing else does. And that's what this does too. It creates these ordeal experiences that you can go through with other people and be like, everybody has their own unique experience of it, but it's the fact that you did it together that's the important thing.
Well, then maybe you can help me out with a question I've been thinking about a lot. How we seem to go through these patterns of something becomes alive and it's rich and it does take us somewhere else and it's powerful, and then it becomes reified enough that it becomes concrete. Then it's a kind of empty dogma that's not just the path, but then you have people go, no, you're doing it the wrong way, and you're not doing the first thing first and the third thing third. Have you thought about how to keep that aliveness in this space?
Yeah, you keep making new empty attainments.
So, and I imagine one of the things you do is open up the model, right? That like, as soon as you become proprietary with the model, then that's a closed system.
Yeah.
But what I like about what you're doing is it's really inspiring. You said it at one point in the book that if you had somebody with a theatrical background with production budget, I mean, we just went to this NASA like VR program where you were wearing a VR headset, like walking through a space station. It was radical. And as soon as you get that kind of production value behind you, it's kind of endless.
Oh my God, there's no end to the creativity that you could bring to it. There's two important things here. One is that whatever you're doing actually has to produce some species of gnosis, which
Uh-huh.
is to say direct and immediate experience of the divine, which is as unmistakable for anything else as an orgasm.
Yeah.
It's,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's
Totally.
fucking gobsmacking. If it doesn't like put you on your knees at some point, like
Oh,
it's not real. Yeah, that pure
yeah.
and all and terror and all the emotions of it. You know what I mean? So it's got
Yeah.
to have that. And then the other part is you just keep telling new stories. Like I have another one. I wrote God, this one will probably get me assassinated at some point. I wrote a pagan Gnostic retelling of the Jesus myth, in which that's a mashup of Moulin Rouge, Juliet, and
Oh,
Romeo and Juliet, and Jesus Christ Superstar.
this
In
is
which,
so great. I'm
in
so
which,
refreshed right now.
good, I'm glad. In which, well, check this out. This is fucking awesome. in which Jesus at age 18 is just this kid roaming through the countryside, like he works in his dad's carpentry shop, but he's getting really good at like painting little like filigrees and leaves and stuff on it. And in order to do that, he needs to gather pigments. So he goes out and gathers minerals out in the desert, like lazurite and limonite and stuff like that. And then, but he finds this flower, this orange flower that seems to almost be glowing. And just experimentally, he takes one of the flowers and he nibbles on it. Oh, it tastes pretty good. And so he takes a handful and sticks them in his pouch. And as he's wandering through the afternoon, he just keeps nibbling on them. And then gradually he starts to realize that they look a little different. things everything seems to be a little bit more there than it was, you know what I mean? And then he finds this he ends up finding this this oasis where no oasis should be. But he's having too good a time to worry about it. And when he kneels down to drink the water, he sees the angel Gabriel in the form of a dozen rings of burning brass, with 1,000 eyes and all that stuff, right? And Gabriel tells Jesus what his job is going to be for the next 15 years. And Jesus is like, fuck that, and fucking runs for it, right? And goes finds his friends and tells them he wants to visit the brothel 2 towns over. And they've been going there for years. And Jesus, for whatever reason, didn't want to do it. But now he's like, I'm going to fornicate and God will not want me anymore. So they bring him to this brothel. And so in the critical difference of this story, it plays off the fact that Mary Magdalene and the Virgin Mary share the same name. In this version of the story, when Mary became pregnant at age 12, nobody believed her story about the angelic visitation, and she didn't get married. Her marriage fell through, and they sent her away to have the baby. And then the baby was taken away, and she was sent to work in a brothel. So when Jesus and his friends, so now she's 31 years old, and she's the owner of the brothel. And now when Jesus' friends bring him to the brothel, he meets this woman and he is absolutely poleaxed. She's the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. And she feels the same way. They have this instantaneous sexual attraction, but it's Jesus and his own mother. And what that plays off of is this, yeah, but that's a very old idea in pagan mythology, right? And so they go up to his room, and at first, like, he can't perform. And so to get him to relax, she gives him a glass of wine, and just without thinking of it, he takes a handful of the leaves, which are now dried in his pouch, and crumbles them into the wine, and they drink it together. And they end up having a vision of themselves. They get high and they make love, and while they're making love, they have this vision of themselves as the goddess and her consort, the dancing god. And they realize who they really are and that they have this mission. And so when they come to, they still remember that, and they start throwing parties at the brothel where they serve wine like spiked with these flowers. And dozens and then hundreds of people were coming out on Friday nights to have these parties and remember that they are God. And then the rabbis start noticing that people aren't showing up for synagogue anymore. So they get agitated and they tell the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin complain to the Romans, and the Romans come and take Jesus away and crucify him. But they ignore Mary because she's just a woman. But on the day of Jesus, when Jesus dies, Mary has his body brought to a grave, and then she tells her friends that she's going to stay the night in the grave with him, and that they should roll the stone in front of the grave. And they don't want to do it, but she makes them. And when they're gone, she takes out a wineskin and fills a goblet, and then puts a lethal dose of the flowers into the wine, and then drinks it down, and then dies by his side. Now, when Jesus died, he was so disfigured that the demons of the underworld didn't meet him. And the king of hell told them to tear him to shreds and hide his body like all over the underworld. And when Mary shows up, though, she knows who she is. She's the great goddess. And she crosses the river, and all the demons know her, and they shout with joy for her presence among them. And she goes through the whole underworld collects all the pieces of Jesus's body and assembles them, but then realizes that something's missing. And so she summons the king of hell, and she says, "Where's Jesus's penis?" And he takes out this elaborately carved wooden box and he flips it open, and there it is, the divine phallus sitting on this bed of purple velvet. And he goes, "You mean this?" And she says, "Yes." And when she reaches for it, he takes it and pops it into his mouth and chews it up and swallows it down. And he says, "Well, guess you're out of luck. Your boyfriend's never leaving here now." And she says, "Is that so?" And she reaches up and she snaps off one of his horns. And she takes Jesus's body and puts him on the throne of hell, and then affixes the horn between his legs. And she says, "There, better than new." And then she takes a giant breath. She fills her body with the essence of hell and death, and then blows with all her might into the horn and blows life back into Jesus. And then he comes back to life. And then it turns out that everybody starts laughing, and the king of hell himself starts tearing his skin apart. And it turns out that he's their oldest child, and that this has been a play that the divine family has put on. And she leads a processional out of hell with everybody in their wake to the strains of "It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll" by AC/DC. So yeah.
Holy fuck. You know, that's one of the best stories I've heard in a long time.
I know. So just imagine that made as a movie, like by Baz Luhrmann. Imagine Baz Luhrmann, who did like Moulin Rouge.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that him remaking Jesus Christ Superstar with that story, and then going to a show where you dance to songs like "Brown Sugar" by the Rolling Stones and "Lady Marmalade" by LaBelle, and like "Could This Be Magic" by Barry Manilow. The part where Mary is harrowing hell is an 18-minute doom metal song by this band called Yob, called "Beauty and Falling Leaves," which is fucking amazing. But each of these songs and the videos themselves are the movie, you know what I mean? That are indicating like what the emotional. It's a musical. It's a jukebox musical, and so then you're in a ceremony environment where everything about the lighting and the because you're surrounded by instructors, a cadre of instructors who are modeling for you how to interact with the songs, how to dance, like how to feel. Because sometimes some of these songs aren't that easy to dance to. You can watch somebody else do it and be like, "Oh, I can kind of do that." And so it's all designed to create these aesthetic moments that you experience alongside everybody else. So this has been what's dominating my mind for the last 5 years. And as you might expect, I'm not having the easiest time getting people like on board with it. And yet to me, it's the obvious future of where we need to go.
I don't understand. If anybody is listening who has access to people with money who want to make investments into things, please contact Sean. This would be wonderful to see.
It'd be fucking amazing.
We've got one major problem here. Freud, Jung, all these psychoanalysts wrote about incest in ways that was extremely valuable and very important to pay attention to. And it was, I mean, I guess it's part of our materialist assumptions right now that things are so concretized externally, as opposed to looking at the eros as a connecting principle and not erotic in the way that we've totally fucked up the term. But that's the first issue. You know, when you see these gods that are fucking everybody and their mothers and children, and then there's rapes and all, these are connections, these are relationships, these are dynamics that are presented in allegorized form that evokes a kind of emotionality. And I think it's totally amazing. That is one of the best stories I've heard in a long time. Thank you very much for that.
Well, and what this art does, so you're right, like in a lot of ways, like the American audience wouldn't be ready for that, but that's no reason to dumb it down.
Not at all.
What it is a reason to educate them and give people like, look, this is actually a common theme in mythologies around the world. Why is that? Because it says something psychologically. And you can't take it literally. But yet there's a scene where like in the Lady Marmalade song, in the music video in my head, Mary is basically chasing Jesus around the room. You know what I mean? Because he's unable, he's impotent and he's terrified, but she's like, "I'm going to work my wiles on you." And you are internally feeling this incredible, it's fucking hilarious because it's so uncomfortable because you know she's his mom. Like there's a sense of dramatic irony there. You know what I mean? Like this is so wrong. And yet it's but so it requires you to be a grown-up. I think that we can call people to higher levels of sophistication. You know what I mean? That's what I see as like the being in the religion of the future, is getting people to abandon literalism and just to grow the fuck up, you know, and like and get and be and you know what? If you hear about this and it really makes you uncomfortable or you find it blasphemous, don't go. It's not for you. You know what I mean? You can go to some other thing, you know, like whatever it's going to be. But that's, every artist would have the opportunity to make those kinds of statements and make challenging and rewarding art.
You walk, so earlier you were talking about this line. I'm imagining that you were questioning your sanity. I imagine that you've done that a few times. And there's a quote from Lionel Corbett that comes up. I've probably said this a couple of times on the podcast. He says the fundamental difference between a religious, like a true, capital T, I guess, religious experience and psychosis is that people who are having a religious event know who to share it with and who not to share it with. The urge to the prophet to sing from the mountaintop, which is that kind, like I have to proclaim this, and that it is then taken literally, is what people in a state of psychosis without the ego strength to differentiate. You've probably developed a great deal of psychological strength as a result of these practices. But there, if you're feeling anxious listening to this, anybody out there are very understandable reasons why. Like, this is walking a line of a fantastic and fascinating line that is not necessarily reserved for everybody.
No. And what I'm doing is I've got a complete imaginal reality in my head. And when you bring, and I'm trying to instantiate it in consensus reality, I'm trying to grow it in consensus reality. People don't like having their realities challenged. It's deeply discomforting, and they'll retreat back into the bulwark of their understanding of how the world works, you know. And even within my trying to be judicious about who I tell about this stuff, I've lost friends, you know, and even my family, like they don't want to hear about it. My dad is a priest. My brother is the director of the American Museum of Religion at the Smithsonian. You know, like they don't want to know about this stuff because it's a live wire. It's really, you can be religious, you know what I mean, and not have anything sort of approaching this sort of like high intensity, I've seen the burning bush kind of thing, you know. And actually, so if I can talk to you just as a moment as a therapist, right, and give me a moment of I don't know, I'll send you a pizza or something. I'll try to make it up for you
on the couch. But,
sure. So I am actually in this deeply uncomfortable place where I go and I have these experiences, these outrageous visionary experiences, and along with them comes this assurance that things are going to work out, like that I will get the resources that I need in order to make this a reality. Whether that looks like coming into money or finding like an investor or finding a group of people who are already working along similar lines, it doesn't really matter to me. But the longer I go, so full candor. Obviously, I put videos of myself in ecstasy on YouTube. Like, I'm not afraid of anything at this point. I'm like, that was a line I crossed a couple. It took time to get to that point of being like, if I don't believe in this 100%, how could I possibly ask anybody else to? But that wasn't an easy place to get to.
I'm sure.
You know, I had returned to the video game industry a few years ago, and I was working as like a middle manager, junior executive type, and I left that job in February. For over a year, I had known that I needed to quit that job. That it was sort of like, I liked the people that I was working with were nice, and having a middle class income and everything was great, but it was also sort of like poisoning my soul. I really found working with video games to be antithetical to my values, because I want people to be in their bodies and to feel emotions. And I'm actually more and more convinced that phones and games are anesthetizing people to a large extent. And I realized I was starting to feel like I was working for Philip Morris or something like that. And so in February, I realized the time had come to kind of take a Kierkegaardian leap of faith and be like, I think this is real. I think that without being too literal about it or anything, like I actually think there are higher order beings that are trying to, and I also don't think I'm the only person doing this. I think that that the prophetic archetype gets activated during times of civilizational crisis, and that whatever is above us sends ideas down here to try to pull the society in a different direction, right? We're kind of in this, for my mind, this sort of like civilizational nosedive. And we need to have this sort of reboot at a spiritual level in order to pull us away from that. And the existing, what I call mass enlightenment strategies have failed to this. So we need new ones. And I got one, but I'm not the only one. There's probably dozens of people around the world who are having similar experiences and are also trying to bring this stuff in. And that's all fine and dandy to sort of entertain as an ongoing fantasy and like live that out in imaginal reality. But when you start trying to bring that into the real world, like eventually like quitting your job and living on savings so you can write books and concentrate on getting ready for the next sort of step in it, then things start to get uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because because you're not delusional, you know for a fact that there's a chance that this isn't going to work. I use the analogy. I was talking to my friend last night. I often compare myself to Roy Neary in Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Have you seen that movie? Right. So imagine, Roy Neary sees a UFO, sees a couple of them, and then has this image in his head, right? He doesn't know what it is. He keeps trying to sculpt. He sculpts it in like shaving cream and in mashed potatoes, and eventually he ends up building this full-size sculpture in his living room of this geological thing. And then he finds, and he doesn't know what it means. It's driving him crazy. He just knows that he's got to make this thing and find it somehow. And then he finds out that it's actually Devil's Tower in Wyoming. And he's like, oh, I've got to go there. And so he goes there. And then in the context of the movie, he sees he's there for the event when the mothership lands, right? And he gets taken away. So imagine you're Roy Neary and you go through all that stuff. You find the image, you find it like sort of confirmed by objective reality, and then you make it through the whole cordon of the army and everything, and you even make it to the alien base. You're there, you're waiting for it, and then they don't show up. Because who knows why? Because maybe their mothership got hit by an asteroid or something like that. But it just doesn't happen, right? Like then what? You've given everything to it, and it didn't work. You know what I mean? And that's a fairly that has been my work this summer, is sort of like living in that space of profound precariousness. And every time I go back, I'm almost leery to. I try to do at this point I'm down to like one ceremony a month. For a while there, I was doing it 3 or even 4 times a month when I was really trying to get my legs under me and figure out what it was I was trying to do and develop skill with this. Now I'm down to once a month, and I know what's going to happen when I go in once a month. I'm going to go in and I'm going to fight these demonic forces that try to stop me at every step of the way until I finally break through into what I call belief space. And belief space is where you leave Maya or mundane reality behind, or specifically the idea that the mundane is the only reality, and you enter a reality where the goddess is the encompassing reality. And then all of a sudden you are suffused with energy, and it's so easy and so delightful. And then you can open up to these fantastic visions that are, basically like video game versions of who is the famous William Blake, right? You know what I mean? Like of these Blake, you imagine like video game versions of like Blake illustrations, like mixed with like perfect, VR simulations of cathedrals and stuff like that, and you just have these utterly gobsmacking visions in which you come out like basically on fire, like, smoke still rising from your head and shoulders, and like being assured that you're on the right track and you're doing the right thing. And you come back into this place where you're all alone with it. You're the only person for whom this is real. It's uncomfortable.
Well, 2 things come to mind. For the boundary walkers they're not allowed in the city.
Yeah.
You can't be witchy and live in the marketplace. And the other piece that I think is important, did you ever stumble into Letters to a Young Poet from Rilke?
No.
He's got a great, this is a really cool, I just always remember this when I bump up against stuff that I find to be really difficult. This one particular passage where Rilke is having this exchange with a young poet who's basically started a correspondence with Rilke, and he's saying, man, I'm really trying to make it. What do you think? What do you think about this poem? What do you think about that poem? I just submitted this poem to this editorial. And Rilke says, you need to ask yourself in the dark of night why you write. And if the answer is a resounding because I must, then you situate your life as if the stars depend on it, and you
Yeah.
live every single waking moment and every single non-waking moment to that effect.
Yeah.
I just think that's it. I mean, I feel very inspired by what you're talking about. Uh,
Well, thank you.
It's
Well, I was just going to say two things really quickly. I just feel like if there's a 1 in a billion chance that this is all real at some level, even if it's not exactly the way that I think, but at some level, this could have a societal impact, that I'm morally obligated to see it through. I just have to.
right.
That's and no matter what the personal cost may end up being. But having said that, I know we've been talking a long time, but I wanted to bring the conversation to the things that to talk about. Let's talk about some pop culture figures.
Well,
Um,
before we do, I want to, yeah, let's orient, because we've got about 22 minutes, and I want to be conscientious of that because I want to be able to close it out. Um, the other piece was the Apollonian Dionysian split here. I mean, you're really talking about how you. I mean, there's a reason why Eleusis is this hidden esoteric place anybody can play if they pay, but it's off the beaten path all the way down. It's 2 times a year. Secrets are guarded by a family dynasty for thousands of years. That's the kind of current that you're playing in. So it certainly is. I think about this a lot. Like, do we need to have esoteric traditions? Uh, can that which is esoteric be brought out into the popular public spaces and still maintain the kind of threads that it maintained in its esoteric container?
yeah. I think as the human race matures, the answer is yes. I think it's time to bring that stuff into the mainstream. I mean, my one of the visions that I had as a consequence of doing that David Bowie working was I saw this sort of theatrical thing taking place in nightclubs, like these sort of futuristic nightclubs.
Yeah.
But then I saw really, really clearly. I was up in the air and looking down at what looked like a soccer stadium, and there was 50,000 people there or something,
Mm-hmm.
and they were watching this spectacle. The way I describe it in the book is like a cross between like Cirque du Soleil and an old school Van Halen concert and the laser light show at the planetarium. But the thing was, I knew that they were all there on mushrooms to engage with a spectacle that was designed to create in them a direct experience of the divine. And I was thinking about what the society would have to look like that could produce 50,000 individuals that could be on high doses of mushrooms and behave themselves in a way that, and realize like, oh, that's where
Totally.
I want to live. I want to live in that society, because you have to be a fucking grown up to do that. Excuse my French.
No, yeah.
Forgive me, Majesty. I'm a vulgar man. Um,
Me too.
no, that's a hole in my game. Like my goal, my thing is like, when you swear reflexively like that, I mean, you're either being mindful or you're being mindless. It's kind of a binary thing. And when I allow myself to sort of get carried away and use that kind of language without really thinking about it, I'm kind of being mindless. So I need to do better. But in any event, that's what I realize that I'm treading into some taboo territory, and in a way like being very, very, very punk about this, but that's absolutely my goal. That's 100% who I want to be.
I don't think it works any other way. I mean, it
Yeah.
reminds me of the capacities of a teenage brain. And I heard years ago there was this study that was done on the whole entire drug campaign. Like, this is your brain on drugs and stay away from that stuff. And it didn't work. And not only did it not work, it said to teenagers, this is where you take risk. To a brain that is predisposed to poke, punch at, rip down any kind of conventional norms, because that's how we get innovation, we're basically saying, here's your pathway. What, just to complete the thought, what did work was a shaming tactic. Don't be that guy, don't be that girl. They have images of like somebody drinking too much and vomiting all over their shirt and being carried out by an attractive like woman or something.
Mm-hmm.
And so that works on the teenage brain that's socially connected and almost totally socially connected. So there is a certain, so the archetype of the orphan is the punk rocker, like I'm separated from the typical developmental pathway. I've been a kind of taboo oriented figure because conventional norms feel foreign to me. I don't know how to speak that language. So I've got to pave a pathway that there is no pathway. Like, it's my pathway because there's no pathway, and
Right.
everybody else walks the pathway that is already written and laid out for them. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
I think it has to be punk.
You have to, in order to call your society in a new direction, you need to stand outside it.
Yes.
That's
I,
what it comes
I,
down. That's what it
I
comes
think
down
that's
to.
totally, and this is
You
why
know.
Nietzsche was all about Dionysus and looking at that kind
Yeah.
of figure.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, Nietzsche is a really important. I mean, I've got that's, you
Ah,
know,
look at that.
but I also have that.
What does that one say? Oh yeah. Oh, look at you.
Yeah. Yeah. So
That's,
those, so they're my governing things, right? And so, and actually
yeah.
in the context of the cabaret, this means amor fati. Like this
Yes.
expresses a certain way to say yes, and it even makes a why to the goddess and her obscure plans for our existence. And we
Yeah.
use this as a sort of wild child affirmation of that all. It's like this, it's sort of this deeply meaningful thing. And that's what entheatainments can be, is this repurposing of the energy of popular culture to help bring in an awareness of the sacred.
Well, and my struggle, when I was doing my dissertation, is that academics don't write about popular culture. It's a taboo to write about that.
Yeah.
So when I head in there to do work on, I mean, I was reading a dissertation in preparation for my work. I forget her name. Sorry. She wrote a dissertation on archetypes in popular music, and she looked at everybody from Guns N' Roses and Metallica to NWA and U2, David Bowie, Joni Mitchell. I said that earlier, and like what's enacting, or what enactments are happening in the relationship between the performer and the audience,
Yeah.
and what kind of energetic dynamics are playing out within each individual. Why do they seek that out? Why does it tend to be male, um, uh, not really nurtured folks who are going to these like heavy metal concerts and thrashing around and punching each other? Like, if we take morality out of it and say that's bad, what's happening there? And why are these people they're happy to do it? They want to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that you're mining through popular culture.
Well,
It's rich.
popular culture is where the religious impulse has been displaced in the
Well
United
said.
States and in
Yeah.
North America. I've had this discussion with my dad many times. I would tell him, Dad, when you see films of the Beatles debut on the Ed Sullivan
Oh
Show in
man. Yeah.
1962, and you're watching those kids scream themselves in a frenzy, that is religious ecstasy. And like when you encounter the goddess in the context of a high, deep visionary experience, that's the reaction that it's like it's uncontrollable. That's the only rational thing to do, is to scream yourself like thank you, you know what I mean? Like, but that's what it is. And that's been and people like Bowie and Jim Morrison and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
they
Mm-hmm.
recognized that and played with it, but they were using it, they weren't actually religious themselves, you know what I mean? And they were willing to sort of play that messianic figure, but not, they weren't using that power to point people toward their own personal experience of the divine. But in a sense, like the way that you play the cabaret is that you role play that you are
Mm-hmm.
the member of a religion of the 23rd century. And as a member of this religion, you believe that God incarnated in the form of popular music during the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Like, there's something about the music that came out during that period that's specifically powerful and enables you to have like deep visionary experiences. And I think in a lot of ways, we sort of feel, as our culture has moved into this decadent phase, like you can see it everywhere, where we're just repeating the same old ideas again and again and again. It's been a
Yep.
long time since there's been anything innovative or particularly interesting in popular music, especially compared to that I don't know, with the ground zero of that explosion, which would have been right around, say, like 1970, 71. When you look at the top 10 lists from those years, it's unbelievable. Like the quality of the album after album after album after
Mm-hmm.
album there. And so it's easy to, I have this concept that's in AP Psychedelics of, Freud had primary and secondary process thinking, right? And primary process thinking is magical thinking, where you think that you can wish something and make it happen out in reality, right? And then secondary process thinking is when the ego is adapted to reality and realizes that wishes don't make things come true. The tertiary process thinking, if I may be granted this, is where it's the cultivation of magical consciousness, where things mean what you want them to mean. And that's the essence of religious belief right there. And so you can actually convince yourself that there's something special about that music, and it's observable because you just get better effects when you're doing phonomancy with it than with other stuff.
You've said magic a couple of times, and I'm looking at the clock. I'm like, Jesus, Sean, we could talk for like 5 more
I
hours.
know.
Um, Talk to me about your background in magic and how you.
I don't really have any background in magic. I've experimented with chaos magic, with doing sigil magic. I watched Grant Morrison is this famous comic book writer, and he made a speech at the 1999 Disinfo conference that got me started. I mean, I've been really stuck in life for a while, and so I've been willing to try anything to try to like figure out like where I'm supposed to go and what I'm supposed to do. So I messed around with sigil magic and never really got anything except that one incredible fucking visionary experience that initial David Bowie sigil caused. I regard magic as a I'm certainly not going to dispute that other people feel like they are somehow able to shape their reality by doing rituals and stuff like that. I haven't been able to do it. And yet I recognize magic in the sense that magic for me is an eruption of a capital M mystery that is eternal into the everyday world. It's this sense of like, you can feel it. It will give you frisson, right? It gives you the goosebumps, you know what I mean? It's just, and it's a sense of wonderful connection and to a larger reality that is now flowing through you. You're no longer just isolated in this world of separate objects and everything, you know what I mean? But you're part of this flow, and not in a and not in a simply a unitive way, but in a way that empowers you. I can't express, this is a topic I could talk about endlessly. I start these ceremonies as myself, like laboring under a really high dose of psychedelic and forcing myself to like get up on my feet and do this work. And it's often really, really difficult. There are forces that you meet in the unconscious. I use the term resistance. I borrowed it from Stephen Pressfield, being this sort of idea of, there's something that wants to, well, for him, it's something that wants to stop you creatively. But Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who wrote Women Who Run with the Wolves, calls it the natural predator of the psyche. And it's the devil, that's what it's mythologized as, right? There's a force in consciousness that wants to kill you. And it wants to kill our society in general. And I actually have really come to believe this. It's not a literal fork and tails devil. And yet you will see it represented in visionary consciousness as stuff like flies and vermin swarming around, or like weird things like I've seen a bazillion things, like a gorilla in a business suit, or like luchadors in these riveted steel masks. Or sometimes it presents as like sweatsuited townies from Massachusetts, and sometimes it's just like rusted fences and like dirty pails and like scrubby like lots. You know what I mean? In the sense of like, who the fuck do you think you are? Think you're better than me? You know what I mean? That kind of like dead dumb menace. And that is a force that is built into this level of reality. And I have to get past that stuff. And it's fucking hard. And it's you're doing it with your own energy until you're not. Until all of a sudden there'll be this release, and all of a sudden you'll be flushed with this energy flowing through you, and all of a sudden everything's easy and you feel totally safe. It's the greatest thing ever. But sometimes that can take like 3.5 hours to get there. And you're like literally the whole time you've just been suffering and suffering and suffering. But sometimes you get there after an hour and a half, you know. That is magic to me. That sense of energy flowing through you that you simply direct to accomplishing your goals rather than using your own energy to get there.
Oh, thank you. The other thing, and I know we only have a few minutes, and I want to be able to close out, but you did a letter to Houston Smith.
Yeah.
And I loved it at the very end. And I know it, like, again, we could talk for hours, but could you summarize the main idea of
yeah. I'll try to. And thank you so much for reading that far. Only I would say less than 6 people in the world have actually read that entire book.
Oh, I read it cover to cover. Yeah.
That's awesome. And it's a short book too. It's only 36,000 words.
Yeah.
You know, it's like late anyway. So what I said, what's that?
It flows.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
I tried to make it a pop culture thing. You know what I mean? I want to be the Stephen King of shamanism. Awesome. I mean, I've got a bunch of jokes like that. I want to be the Greg Glassman of shamanism. That's Greg Glassman founded CrossFit, and I want to be the who's the guy that made The Room? You know that movie, The Room?
No.
Oh, that's a topic for another time. Anyway, so Houston Smith was this professor of world religions at Berkeley, and he was there at the early days of the Harvard psilocybin experiment. He was there in there with Tim Leary and Ram Dass, Richard Alpert, and he wrote a book called Cleansing the Doors of Perception, in which he republished some of his early writings about the religious possibilities that psychedelics afforded. And he claimed at the time that although psychedelics could cause religious experiences, they didn't seem to give rise to the religious life because they didn't inculcate a sense of faith and discipline. They didn't call upon faith and discipline. And he didn't see any sort of evidence of that. And so then I wrote a reply to him, a repost, if you will. And what I said was that I had come to realize that all religions were games of make-believe that could yield real-world results, right? I mentioned this earlier on. And at this point, I refer to that as a para-reality game, as a paranormal para-reality, and as opposed to an augmented reality game, which is what I described it as in the book. And a para-reality game is a complete out-of-the-box system of beliefs and practices designed to enable and condition an experience of the sacred while creating the conditions for community. All right, so that's what all religions basically are. They're just stories. Like Jesus rose from the dead after 3 days. That's just a story. And to the extent that we have, and the same is true about the Quran being dictated by the Archangel Gabriel to Muhammad, or the Buddha sitting under the Bodhi tree for 49 days and then being tempted by Mara and then passing. Like, these are stories written often decades after the fact by people who weren't actually there. And so lacking, but as Carl Sagan says, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So lacking a time machine to go back and actually video these events, we just have to take their word for it. But the best you can say about them is they're quasi-fictional. They're sort of made up, or they're imaginally true, and that's all they need to be. And what adherents of religions do is they make a choice, whether unconscious or not, to believe these stories are true and then pattern their behavior on the stories. And they use them as interpretive models of reality. And then they have experiences which then reinforce their idea that these things are true. But once you realize the fact that you're playing a game, the difference between what I'm doing and what they're doing is that we realize, and I say we, me and the fictional people who are doing this with me, we understand that we're playing a game. But it's if I can I'll just briefly read the thing where the quote. The phonematic method and its entheotainments set chemically induced religious experiences in the context of a new kind of faith that is no less earnest or life-changing for being self-aware that it is quasi-fictional. It's a game that becomes reality the moment it puts you up close and personal with the goddess. Credo quia iocis et quia operator, which means I believe because it's fun and because it works. And that's kind of a play off of the famous quote from Tertullian, I believe because it's absurd, right? And then on the other side is that, so that's faith. And then the discipline part, it says here, achieving phonematic gnosis is not easy. It's the result of disciplined efforts made to develop skill with psychedelic medicine. It demands courage and sacrifice. It depends on your ability to realize your potential across 8 dimensions of self. It is an answer to the not always welcome call of spirit. When Houston Smith wrote that nowhere in Western civilization could he find an example of entheogenic mysticism being joined to, quote, an exercise of the will toward fulfilling what the disclosures ask of us, he may have been correct at the time. I hope I've provided evidence that what he was looking for has now arrived. So,
well, so there is something here about. I was chatting with Michael Winkelman last week, and the metaphor tends to show up about the television set, as you've heard by reading Huxley. The television set is the riverbed. The show is the story. There's something like these stories are so potent and tap into some kind of aspect of the structure of reality that and our linguistic symbol creating structure of our own kind of brain and mind pour enormous power into these stories. We will always be storying in a story.
Yes, yeah. And the problem with the traditional religions is that they have for a lot of people, those stories no longer entice, they no longer inspire. And so ultimately what phonomancy, the phonomantic method, and entheotainments and power reality games is a religion for people who wouldn't be caught dead in church. It's a way for these people who are otherwise alienated and estranged from an experience of the sacred to have one and realize that that's the only thing that's real. And that's all that ultimately matters. Does it work? Does the practice you're engaging with get you up close and personal with that life-changing experience?
Sean, thank you so much for writing the book and for doing what you do. This is a really unique conversation and process. I just feel a great sense of gratitude that that you're doing this.
Thank you so much for being an engaged and sympathetic listener. It means the world to me. So, yeah.
Do you want to direct anybody anywhere? I'll certainly have links and all that. Is there anywhere people can...
Just if you can buy my book, it's $9.99 on Amazon.
Yep.
And then you can, if on the back there's that I have virtually no social media presence. There's a website called popularpsionics.com. It's just a placeholder for this book, and then this one, which is my spiritual autobiography. And of course, you get the visual pun of that, right?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I sure do.
I honestly think that if this actually ends up working, there will be like people writing like PhDs just to like dig out all the popular culture references, because you basically need one in order to get a joke like that. But my personal email is at the bottom of it, and if you want to get in contact and like chat me up, I'm happy to talk to anybody. I'm happy to try to, if anybody has been doing this, gained any sort of comfort with psychedelics and are at all intrigued by this approach, I can give you some guidelines on how to get started with it. Just in terms of personal experimentation, and then developing like these ideas of like concentration and clarity and self-control in that state.
Well, thank you for this. This is fantastic, man. It's
Thank you so much.